Hi everyone, this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with some Halloween recommendations, which is kind of fun, and I hope I'm not putting this out there too late, but I finally found some time where I could film this, so I thought that I would, just in time for Halloween. So the first three books I'm going to talk about today are more paranormal ghost story type books, and they're all a little bit older. So the first book that I'm going to talk about today is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This was published in 1959, and when I originally read this, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Well, it's one of those books, looking back, that I feel like maybe could have been a 5-star read. So I did really enjoy this one when I first read it, and do highly recommend it. So this follows 4 people who go and stay in this haunted, or supposedly haunted house called Hill House. One of them is this doctor, and he's doing some paranormal experiments, and so that's why he's chosen to stay in this house, and he invites the other 3 people for various reasons to kind of help him in his experiments. And as they're staying there, more and more creepy things start to happen, and it gets creepier and scarier as it goes along. Now, the book is written in the first-person perspective of a girl named, is it Eleanor? Eleanor. Shirley Jackson, this is the second book I've read of hers, and she does the first-person female perspective really well, and it's like an interesting psychological exploration, but it's like very creepy and unsettling, and you can't really quite figure out what their deal is, and that's how it is with Eleanor, and it gets weirder as the book progresses, and I really loved that perspective, and I love Shirley Jackson's writing and how she explores being in these characters' minds. It's really fascinating. So when you're getting it from Eleanor's perspective, then this ghost story becomes rather ambiguous. So this is one of those ghost stories where you really don't know what is going on, and that's the question, because it's a very psychological ghost story. So it is creepy, it could be paranormal, it could be psychological, it could be both. And Eleanor is a very weird character, and probably an unreliable narrator. So there's that really interesting aspect of this book, which is not kind of what you expect from it, but I really enjoyed it and thought it was really excellent, really interesting, fabulous, like creepy ghost story, but yet in a like ambiguous psychological kind of way. And yeah, the writing was phenomenal, and I really recommend this. And the other book I've read of Shirley Jackson's is pretty creepy too. I won't really talk about it here. I have talked about it in a recent wrap-up, but that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle. And that is not a ghost story, but it's very creepy too, and I actually do recommend that for the Halloween season too. So I feel like Shirley Jackson is a wonderful creepy author for this time of year. Second book I want to talk about is another ghost story, and this one is in a similar vein actually, but it takes a different turn. So that is Hell House by Richard Matheson, and this was published in 1971. And originally when I read this, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads as well. So this has a similar premise. 4 people, again, go and stay in this haunted house, the Belasco house, which is apparently the Mount Everest of haunted houses. And it's led by a doctor again, and he wants to find out whether there's life after death, and he wants to find out the true cause of the activity at Hell House. And there was an expedition before this one, and it ended really badly. I think maybe everyone died but one person. And so it's kind of quite the mission they're all embarking on. And Belasco House, when it was in use, was the scene of a lot of terrible things and very weird things as well. The doctor wants to figure this out, and he brings along his wife because I don't think she wants him to go by himself. And then also this like renowned spiritualist, psychic woman named Florence, and then this renowned medium named Benjamin, and he was the only person that escaped the first time there was an investigation in this house. So they all go to stay in this house, and a bunch of creepy things happen again. And this is very creepy as well. Maybe this one's a little bit scarier than The Haunting of Hill House. And yeah, this one is more paranormal than The Haunting of Hill House. It does not really have a psychological explanation, but I feel like it explores the paranormal in a very interesting way that I liked, because there's so many different theories on the true cause of this activity. Like, they all agree that it is paranormal in nature, but in what way exactly is explored. And I actually thought it was an actual interesting exploration that was done in this book of events that seem paranormal. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I liked that. Now, there was a psychological element to it, but not about the haunting, really. That definitely was more like a paranormal exploration of those kinds of events and what is the true cause of them. But between the characters staying in the house, like while they're dealing with some of the ghostly stuff that's going on, there's kind of an exploration of them. And so there was an interesting psychological element, but just with the characters separate from the haunting. But the haunting kind of made them explore certain things, and I thought that was actually really interesting. And so I really enjoyed actually some of the character study that was done in this book. I thought that was done really well. And yeah, so it was very creepy, very intriguing. It's a weird thing to say, but like, so this book is published in 1971, and there's something so like 70s about it. Like, I don't know if I've read, like, I can't think of other like scary books from the 70s, but like I've seen quite a few like 70s like horror films, and there's just something about them that is just kind of funny, and like, I don't know, you're just like, wow, that's like so 70s. So there's something about that in here, and there's a lot of weird like sexual stuff, and I don't know, so there's like a weird element to this that, I don't know, just seems kind of right for the kind of horror of its time. But I did really enjoy this, and this was creepy and similar to The Haunting of Hill House kind of vein, but ended up being quite different. So the third book I want to talk about is another ghost story. And this is The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, which was published in 1983. Now, this one has a little bit of a different storyline compared to the first two I talked about. And this is more of like a gothic ghost story. And, oh yeah, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars when I originally read it. Although, looking back, I feel like it deserved a little more, like 4 stars, maybe. Anyway, so this is more of a gothic ghost story, and it follows this man named Arthur Kipps, and he's relating to us this ghostly encounter he had when he was younger that has really impacted his life. And so when he was younger and he worked for this law firm, he was sent out to this small village to represent the law firm at their client, Mrs. Drablow's funeral, and to stay at her house, Eel Marsh House, and go through her papers and whatnot that need to be sorted through. So while he's staying at this old, creepy, isolated house, which is just the perfect creepy haunted house setting, and it's far out on the marshes, and he starts seeing this like woman dressed all in black, and it goes from there, and all this stuff happens, and it escalates. And yes, this is pretty creepy as well. The 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 best thing about this novel was the atmosphere. This was just so atmospheric, and I think that's what Suzanne Hill did really well in this book. So just one of those gothic ghost stories with a lot of atmosphere, and it was pretty good, and I recommend this too if this is the type of ghost story or creepy book you feel like this Halloween. This book I want to recommend today is in a little bit of a different vein, and it's more of a creepy psychological thriller. So if you're wanting something more creepy in like a psychological way, then I would recommend this, and that is The Bad Seed by William March, which was published in 1954. And I gave this 5 out of 5 stars when I first read this. I really found this really fantastic. So this follows a mother and her daughter as the mother slowly realizes that her daughter is a sociopath, and she also realizes the cause of some terrible things that have happened around them. And yeah, like I said, this was a fabulous psychological exploration, and it had some really good plot twists as well. Of course, it was a very interesting exploration of the daughter, and I found it a really excellent exploration of sociopathy in particular, and of a sociopath. It's something I'm kind of fascinated by and read a little bit about, and I thought this was a really just excellent portrayal of that, and so interesting to have like a little girl that's a sociopath, because she's so unassuming. She's the last person you would think would be a sociopath, but it just kind of shows anyone can, and that it starts out in childhood, so even these innocent children have this sort of mental problem. And I feel like this also kind of started off the creepy child dynamic in horror films that can be so terrifying. But besides the exploration of sociopathy and also some violence and stuff around Rhoda, the little girl, it was an interesting exploration of everyone's psychology. The mother and kind of her stuff was explored, and just even like the neighbors and stuff like that. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful portrayal of just like psychological exploration in all ways, but particularly of sociopathy. And it was just a very creepy and very fascinating book, and I just thought it was really well done. Now, this was made into a film, and Vintage, I think I've talked about this before, has put out this series of books called Vintage Movie Classics, where they like have reprinted books that were turned into like old classic films, with the books have kind of gone out of print or whatever. And this is 1 out of 2 that I've read. And I had seen the film of this beforehand, and I don't know, like, I don't love it. But I thought this was so fantastic. This was much better than the film, and I just really recommend it. It's very creepy. Fifth book I want to recommend in this video is more of, I don't know, straight up horror maybe, and that is It by Stephen King, which was published in 1986, and which I gave 5 out of 5 stars when I first read this. I really loved it, and which is kind of ironic. I really loved it. Anyways, I know this book has been all over the place right now because of the recent release of the movie, which I did see. It was okay. I'm not sure how much I loved it, but the book is fantastic and quite long too. Anyway, so this follows 7 children in like the 50s, and they're called the Losers, and they kind of have a club, and they come into contact with this creepy demon. And I guess it's not really he, disguises itself as different things that each of the kids fear. But I believe that adults can't see this thing. And I think they from my memory, I believe they get it to go away for the time being, and they say that if it ever returns, that they must come back there and get rid of it for once and for all. And so then fast forward to the 80s when they're all adults and they do all get phone calls and they all must return to beat this thing once and for all. And this book is very long, and because you get the childhood and the adulthood of all these characters, I feel like you get a wonderful exploration of each of them. So it's on a character level, it's really wonderful. And you just grow to care for all of them, and all their relationships are just really endearing and beautiful, actually. And there is a lot of creepy stuff in this book, but I don't know if that's what I took away from it, which is so strange. Like, it is very creepy, but I feel like this book, I expected to come out of it very scared and kind of seeing the power of fear and stuff like that. But I didn't come out of it feeling that way. I came out of this instead of seeing the power of fear. I saw the power of love versus fear. And I thought that was a beautiful message. So this is a horror story and it is creepy, but it actually has a lot of depth to it. And actually is a beautiful meaning, which is maybe not what you would expect from this. It's not what I expected from it. Every time I say that, it makes me laugh. But it impacted me a lot, and I thought this was really wonderful. And this, surprisingly, is the only book I've read by Stephen King, and I really want to read more of his books, especially after reading this one, because it was really phenomenal, and I highly recommend it. Next book I have to recommend in this video is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and this was published in 1962. So this is a little bit magical and a little bit creepy, but it's set in the autumn, and it starts out just right about at Halloween, and it has that wonderful autumn feel to it. And it follows, my star rating. So when I first saw this, I gave this 4 to 5 stars on Goodreads. I feel like that's kind of common, the books I'm sharing. Anyway, so it follows 2 boys, Jim and Will, and also, whose dad is it? I forget whose dad. And one of their dads, Mr. Holloway. Charles Holloway, I believe. And the 2 boys discover that this carnival has come to town called Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Show, but the carnival has a dark purpose, and it feeds on everyone's innermost wishes and fears and unhappiness. Now, this book, my favorite thing about this book was how beautifully it was written. This is seriously written very beautifully. And it explores a lot of, like I said, because the carnival feeds on everyone's unhappiness, what they wish, what they fear. And so that's kind of explored in our characters, and it's explored with the dad, Charles Holloway, in particular, and kind of where he feels like he has failed and his unhappiness with himself, and how old he feels and how he's failed his child and stuff like that. And it's kind of a beautiful exploration of that. And then also of the boys and kind of them wanting to grow up too quickly, maybe. And maybe its kind of overall meaning was to be happy where you are in life and don't run so much towards the future. Kind of be happy with where you are and what you are given and your age and everything. So it had like a lovely little message, a beautiful exploration of the characters, and with a creepy magical element and a very fallish atmosphere. And I very much recommend this. Last 3 books I want to briefly talk about are a little bit older scary classics, and they're all kind of from around the beginning of the 20th century. So I've got these 3 here. So one of them is just a little novella, and it is a ghost story, and that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This was published in 1898, and this kind of started out the ambiguous ghost story thing that Haunting of Hill House kind of took on. And this follows a governess who goes out to this big country estate to take care of these 2 children, and she starts seeing 2 sinister figures on the estate. And is it from a first person perspective? I think so. And yeah, and it's a very ambiguous ghost story again, and you don't know, like, is it a psychological thing with her, or is it actually haunted? So yeah, so it's one of those ambiguous, possibly psychological ghost stories. It's very interesting, and you never really find out the answer, and it keeps you guessing. And yeah, because it starts out with that very like gothic, creepy old house kind of ghost story. Sorry, by the way, my dog keeps barking, and so there's dogs outside too. Hold on. Anyway, so it's pretty creepy and kind of turns the typical ghost story on its head, and is definitely like the predecessor for something like The Haunting of Hill House. So the next one I want to talk about is a mystery, and that is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And this was first published in 1902. And I kind of just want to talk about Sherlock Holmes mysteries in general, because maybe you want like a cozy, old-fashioned mystery to curl up with this Halloween, and Sherlock Holmes is perfect. I loved Sherlock Holmes for a really long time. I've read almost all the Sherlock Holmes. I think there's like 4 novels and then quite a few short stories collections. I think I've read all of the short story collections, and I've read 2 of the novels. And this one is just my favorite, so that's why I thought I'd mention this. I think taking a Sherlock Holmes mystery and putting it in a novel format is just so wonderful. And this one is very creepy and very atmospheric, and it's set on the moors, and there's a lot of twists and turns, and I feel like this is just such a wonderful atmospheric and creepy book and wonderful mystery. So I just recommend Sherlock Holmes in general for this time of year, but I particularly recommend The Hound of the Baskervilles as a good place to start, especially if you're feeling more like a novel and not a short story. And last but not least, I have The Phantom of the Opera, which was written by the French author Gaston Leroux, and this was first published in 1911. And I'm sure a lot of you know the story of this because it's a very famous musical, and that musical has been turned into a movie and all of that. But the original book is very interesting to read, and it's kind of creepy and a good mystery too. And it's set in the Paris Opera House, and there's just like this whole world that goes on inside the Paris Opera House that you don't realize, and that there's a phantom that kind of haunts the opera house. But it's not a ghost story, though, if you don't know. And it follows this opera singer named Christine. And, yeah. And it's very mysterious, I'd say. Maybe not creepy, but more mysterious, because you want to find out what happens. But I just found this really interesting, though, because of the setting of the opera house and this vast world of the opera house. And also how some of this is based on truth, as in a lot of the stuff about the opera house and what's underneath it is based on fact, and part of the story might be kind of true. Not all of it, but like maybe some legend or something is based on this. I forget exactly, but it is a very mysterious book with just a really interesting setting, and so it's kind of creepy if you want something old and classic, but not too scary, but kind of mysterious. This is good for this time of year. So those are all the books I had to recommend in this Halloween recommendations video. It's kind of funny, I guess. I didn't really choose any books that were too modern. They ended up being kind of older, so hopefully that's okay, but maybe that's kind of a little bit of a different Halloween recommendations video. You get some classic recommendations. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have a happy Halloween when that comes around. If you've read any of these books or want to talk to me about them, feel free to comment below. As always, you can find me on Tumblr and Goodreads, which I will also link below. And I will see you soon for my October wrap-up, I believe. So, bye everybody.